All right, let's get right into this. Today, we're not just looking at history books. We're opening a cold case file, a massive one. The victims? Dozens and dozens of Roman emperors. The crime scene? Well, it's the entire Roman Empire. Think of it like this. We're treating the Roman throne as the single most dangerous job in history, and we're here to figure out why.
And look, that's not just some dramatic line for effect. It's the absolute core truth of our investigation. Holding the ultimate power in the ancient world, it wasn't a ticket to a long and happy life. Not even close. It was actually the opposite. It basically painted a giant target on your back from the second you took the job.
And here's the number that just blows this whole case wide open. Over half, yeah, you heard that right, more than 1 in every 2 Roman emperors died of violent death. We're talking daggers, poison, strangulation, you name it. That's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. And a pattern this bloody demands a much, much closer look.
So to really understand this pattern, you can't start in the middle. You've got to go back to the beginning, to the one crime that basically set the stage for centuries of bloodshed to follow. This is our case zero.
You see, the murder of Julius Caesar wasn't just another political hit. It was kind of the original sin of the Roman Empire, when a whole group of senators, men he knew, men he called his friends, stabbed him to death right on the Senate floor. They didn't just kill a man. They killed the idea that power in Rome could ever be transferred peacefully again. They basically wrote the playbook for political murder.
And this really lays out the scene of the crime, doesn't it? On one side, you've got this idea of the Republic, built on shared power, on the rule of law. But on the other side is the reality that grew out of Caesar's murder, an empire built on the absolute, unchecked power of just one guy. This wasn't just a change in management. It was the birth of a whole new system where violence became the default way to get ahead.
And you want to know how deep this betrayal cut into our culture? For centuries, people couldn't get over it. So much so that when Dante was writing his Inferno, he saved the deepest, darkest, most horrible circle of hell, not for your average murderers, but for traitors. And guess who's right there at the very bottom, being chewed on by Lucifer himself for all eternity? Brutus and Cassius. That's how big of a deal this was.
So, now that we've got the precedent set, let's get into the forensics. How were these crimes actually carried out? Who were the usual suspects? And what were their go-to methods?
I mean, the irony here is just staggering. The #1 suspect in most of these imperial murders. It wasn't some foreign spy or a political rival. It was the Praetorian Guard, the elite, hand-picked soldiers whose entire job was to protect the emperor. They had the closest access, they had the most trust, and they had the sharpest knives. They were judge, jury, and way too often the executioner.
And their methods? Well, they were simple, brutal, and they worked. A quick dagger in a hallway was a classic move. Poison was a little more sneaky. Strangulation for when things needed to be up close and personal. But maybe the scariest method of all was just public betrayal. The guard would literally just step aside and let a mob or a rival faction do their dirty work. The real point is, the threat was everywhere, all the time.
But here's the thing you have to understand. This level of violence wasn't just happening in the emperor's bedroom. To really get the world these guys lived in, we've got to zoom out. You have to see that this was a culture that was just soaked in a very specific, very organized kind of cruelty. It was part of the system.
Just take a look at something called decimation. Let's say a Roman legion was accused of cowardice in battle, but commanders wouldn't just punish the guys in charge. No. They'd make the soldiers themselves draw lots, and 1 out of every 10 men would be beaten or stoned to death by his own friends, by his comrades. Think about that. It's not just punishment, it's a form of psychological torture designed to create absolute, terrifying obedience.
And just when you think it can't get any more brutal, you find out about the penalty of the sack. This was saved for what the Romans considered the absolute worst crime imaginable, killing your own father. The person found guilty was stitched up inside a thick leather sack, but they weren't put in there alone. Oh no, this was a whole ritual. Inside that sack, sealed in with the condemned man, were these 4 live animals: a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a chicken. Then the whole bag was sewn shut and tossed into the nearest river to sink. This kind of planned, ritualized cruelty tells you everything you need to know about the Roman capacity for brutality.
And this culture of betrayal wasn't just an inside job either. It could cripple the empire from the outside too. Just look at the case of Arminius. He was a Germanic nobleman who was actually trusted by the Emperor Augustus, and Arminius used that trust to orchestrate one of the most infamous betrayals in all of military history.
He led 3 entire Roman legions. We're talking almost 20,000 professional soldiers into a perfectly laid trap deep in the Teutoburg forest. The result wasn't a battle. It was a complete and total massacre. This one defeat was so bad, so psychologically devastating, that Rome basically gave up forever on trying to conquer the lands east of the Rhine. A single act of treachery literally redrew the map of Europe.
All right, we've seen the culture, we've looked at the methods, we've analyzed the crime that started it all. Now it's time to open up the case files and look at some of the most high-profile victims on our list. Okay, let's run down the rap sheet. Exhibit A, Caligula. We've all heard the stories about his tyranny. How did he die? Cut down by the very Praetorian Guard sworn to protect him. Exhibit B, Commodus, the so-called gladiator emperor. You'd think he'd die in the arena, right? Nope. Strangled in his bath by his personal wrestling partner. And then there's Elagabalus, another one killed by his own guards. You see the pattern here? Power brought people close, and being close gave them the perfect opportunity to strike.
So after reviewing all this evidence, what's the final verdict on the Roman system of power? What can we possibly conclude from this long, bloody, and frankly terrifying history?
Here's the bottom line. The constant violence, it wasn't a bug in the system, it was the system. The story of Roman power isn't just about glorious conquests and beautiful marble statues. It's a cold case file. It's a dark history of treachery that proves, time and time again, that the biggest threat to the emperor was never the enemy at the gates. It was the man standing right behind him.
And all of this leaves us with one final haunting question, doesn't it? When you build a system that puts all the power in the world into the hands of just one person, is this what you always get? Is a throne built on daggers and poison the only kind that can ever exist? Something to think about.